Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's episode of Dr. G's Think Tank on Resilience. I am really glad you're joining us because we're going to talk about something today that people don't usually address head on. We're going to talk about collaboration and competition and how, as a leader in any kind of business, you figure out which to pursue when and find the resilience in yourself to do that and to bring your people along as well. Let me start by introducing our guests. Jeanette Kaploun, an award-winning bilingual journalist, TV personality, mom, speaker, and Latina content creator, has been featured on Good Morning America, Today, Despierta America, Hoy Día, CNN en Español, and other shows. Founder of the bilingual lifestyle magazine Hispania Global, where she offers inspiration, tips, and information in English and Spanish. Before that, she co-founded multimedia parenting company Todo Bebe and was one of the very first Latina mom bloggers. She serves as special advisor to the Bank of America Institute for Women's Entrepreneurship at Cornell and was included in one of the Forbes Next 1000 lists recently. I've known and collaborated with Jeanette for the past decade, and I am repeatedly blown away by her practical generosity and thoughtful ambition. Jeanette, hi, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for those beautiful words. I'm humbled.
I want to ask you, when have you seen competition be more valuable to a business than collaboration?
Well, competition sometimes makes total sense when you think that you're even better than your competition at something. And also when you really want to achieve a goal, it's better to compete for it than to collaborate because sometimes other people don't share the same values and it's your only opportunity to shine.
I really appreciate that. And we're going to dive more into that because as I was mentioning to our guests before we began, and if you feel differently about this, feel free to push back in the comments. And I hope that my panelists will as well. But I really feel that we hear over and over again. And also, I wonder if there's a gender split here. But as a woman business owner, I hear often that collaboration is a much higher ethic than competition. That's how we should be, that a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm not sure that's always true. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this. Let me next introduce Avi Wazana. Avi is a deeply experienced chief executive officer with a demonstrated history of working in the manufacturing, real estate, and advisory industries. As the CEO of Business Max, today Avi focuses on investments and development in the real estate space, financing activities, and alternative growth opportunities. In addition, Avi remains deeply passionate about supporting other companies and entrepreneurs and is engaged in executive coaching, board and advisory roles, and business development for his clients. I got to meet Avi and his family earlier this year at a YPO event and was immediately uplifted by his humor, his wisdom, and his unique view of the world. Hi, Avi. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Those are big words. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So I'd like to ask you, when have you seen competition be more valuable to a business than collaboration?
There's multiple examples. I'll refer to historically. My original business was manufacturing or remanufacturing of ink and toner cartridges. That industry was quite a bit of a cottage industry, and it created a scenario where a lot of the players were substandard in quality, and it needed to kind of like flush through because it created a black eye to the industry. We came in with a value proposition that was about quality versus price, and it made sense to compete and, for lack of gentler words, is to really eliminate competition in the process. We started with 10,000 little remanufacturers and we ended up with 5, right, over a couple decades. So it made sense. It sounds aggressive, but it made sense for the sake of the industry and the consumer confidence in the products that we were bringing to market.
And there's something about the state of the world right now where when you say it sounds aggressive, it feels like you maybe feel like there's an apology needed for that when in business, historically, there is not. And I do think that fair business practices can still be aggressive and competitive. It's an interesting pressure that is one of the things I'd like to really examine a little bit today.
Yeah, I never apologize for being highly competitive, and I never apologize for putting competitors out of business if it was the right thing to do. It's their responsibility to compete and win, just like it's ours. And my responsibility was for my clients and my employees and keeping the lines running. So I never really apologized. There's a lot of room for collaboration, which we did as well. But that was a scenario where you should never apologize for being highly competitive.
Yeah, I think that's valuable. Okay. And now I'd like to introduce our last guest. Doug Ullman is a three-time cancer survivor and serves as the vice chairman of the board of directors at Pelotonia, whose objective is to fund life-saving cancer research. Doug is also a seasoned investor and entrepreneur, and he founded Orly in 2022 to shine a light on our biggest societal problems and the entrepreneurial talent arriving to solve them. Through his work there, Doug identifies and connects the world's most audacious social entrepreneurs with the resources they need to succeed. He recently served as a Hauser leader at Harvard Kennedy School for Public Leadership and speaks frequently at some of the nation's most acclaimed festivals and conferences. I was lucky enough to meet Doug at an event for YPO in his home city of Columbus and was struck by his insightful, clear, and open-minded view of what's happening around him. Doug, hi, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
When have you seen competition be more valuable to a business than collaboration?
Well, it's interesting. I'll add just maybe a little bit of a different spin, which is in the social sector, whether it be philanthropic or social entrepreneurship space, I don't see the world as a zero-sum game. And so competition pushes us to achieve more than we ever would have dreamt possible if you are aiming to serve more people. And so just to follow on to Avi's point, I think you can be a part of a community and still be really competitive. And those aren't mutually exclusive. And I see that time and time again in the sort of nonprofit philanthropic space.
This is really interesting. I want to dive into this because usually it's not a zero-sum game. It's used to aim people towards collaboration, right? They're like, oh, you don't have to compete because it's not basically a finite pot of resources. And so it's okay to lift other people up. You'll get yours too, is the message I've always heard from that phrase. And I really am very interested in using that idea to say, so it's okay to compete. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. When I served as the CEO of the Livestrong Foundation, we were 1/10 or 1/15 the size of the American Cancer Society. And every quarter, we would have a home-and-home visit with their executive team and our executive team in Austin or in Atlanta. And we would share what we were doing, and they would share what they were doing. There were things we could do that they could never do, even though they had 15 times the resources, right? We had a different reach, we had a different brand, we had a different demographic, we had different programs. So we were competing, quote unquote, for, I guess, philanthropic dollars or attention or resources.
Cancer-focused social good.
Yeah,
okay.
But the programs and the service delivery was sort of building a community that was helpful to many. So again, there's a gray area, I think, in some of these conversations for being a part of a community while also competing vigorously.
Okay, so I hope that you can see why you are the three that I really wanted to have for this conversation. You really come to competition and collaboration from different lenses, but it seems like it's something that all three of you have had to think a great deal about in your work. And I'd like to start off, and I picked a very general question because I'm not exactly sure where it will take us. And this idea of thinking about competition within collaboration is what seems like it's emerging from the block of ice that we're sculpting together. But I'd like to start, and Avi, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk about, as a business leader, since, and this can be in your own work or with people that you've coached in business leadership, how do you distinguish between opportunities for collaboration and opportunities to really compete?
It's a good question. Historically, in our business, there was a tremendous opportunity to improve quality and redefine who really the competition is. And I'll explain. And it's a good example. In a remanufacturing space, a lot of these 10,000 remanufacturers always felt that they're competing with each other. So I make a remanufactured cartridge against, it's a third party, and I compete with the other guy. The reality is that we defined our competition as the OEMs, the original guys that build the best product better than ours. And that's what we aimed at. It lended itself to an opportunity for us to work with a bunch of these 10,000 smaller remanufacturers bringing them into our facility, showing them what we do, and basically convincing them to get out of remanufacturing and outsource, right? So if you think about it that way, so the question was, when do you really know if somebody is a competitor or not? Well, ultimately, there's other players that are bigger doing what we're doing at the time, and they are really pure manufacturers because we're on the same track. We want to roll over the smaller guys to become our clients and get out of manufacturing. So I think that my answer really has to do with the intent and how genuine the other side is in terms of really exploring collaboration versus coming to visit our facility, learning as much as they can without really an intent to collaborate. So we had to really determine how genuine was the other side every time we invited them to open the door and look at what we do and give us an opportunity versus they're really just trying to take advantage. The example was that there were a lot of players that were, let's say, out of the country. They were not really abiding by the rules. Maybe they were infringing on IP and coming in with a lower quality at a lower price. We had no interest. Those are competitors. Those we want to really compete and put out, right? So that was the process that we were going through. Who is really generally interested in bettering their product and moving forward with us and having a value proposition?
What I'm hearing you and Doug, you say is that when you're thinking about a collaboration and competition, you have to ask, how genuine are they, in your words, Avi, right? And what are their strengths and their weaknesses? So you looked at who wasn't going to be able to do this quality piece as much as you could. Maybe they had something unlocked about the quantity or the speed, but not the quality.
Right.
What their values are, that's what you're speaking about when you say how much integrity, IP, are they going to just come in and try and scrape what they can from that visit, or are they really meaning to have a conversation? And then, Doug, I really heard when you talked about Live Strong and the American Cancer Society, the overriding principle there is you shared a goal that, yeah, everybody wants their organization to succeed, but if we could cure cancer, it's hard to be mad, right? So if you share an overriding principle, then it makes competing where you compete and collaborating where you can do each other good, it makes that all valuable. Then I start to see how it really is a zero-sum game. It's really, you can say it's not a zero-sum game, that it's okay that some is competition and still some can be collaboration, if I'm understanding that piece correctly.
Yeah, I think so. And I think I mean, Avi said something about quality. I think that's really important too, right? So every organization, business, nonprofit, you might have a long-term plan that, and I'll give you a quick example. So Pelotonia runs the second largest fundraising event in the country, right? It's a bike ride in Columbus, Ohio. 100% of the money goes to cancer research. That was modeled after an event in Boston called the Pan Mass Challenge, which is the largest in the country. They raised $70 million last year. We have no intention of going into Boston, right? So we aren't infringing on their sort of area geographically. And so the difference between where we are and our growth potential is massive. So if we can learn from them, great. If we can share with them, great. If they wanted to set up shop in our backyard, would we compete? Yes, we would say, hey, we are better quality. We're going to provide a better experience, and we're going to compete with them. But for the time being, that's not on our radar, and it's not on their radar. And so there's an opportunity to learn from each other and grow and sort of seek our respective potentials.
I think that's key, actually, learning from what other organizations, other businesses are doing, other leaders are doing is key. That's key to growth. But there comes a point that if that competitor is going after your clients, after your fundraising base, after all the brands, in my case, that you have worked with, then you know what? The gloves are off. We're competing for the same campaigns. We're competing for the same clients. We're competing for the same donors. And as long as you're doing it ethically and you're following your values and you're staying true to what your business, your organization stands for, I don't see the problem. I think we have to stop seeing competition as a dirty word, especially women-owned businesses, in which you were mentioning the bias, Debbie, and it is so true. It's wrongful to see as women competing against each other. We're not being cutthroat, although I do come from an industry that traditionally is cutthroat, which is TV. That's where I started
TV journalism.
my career.
Yeah.
Yes, so that is very competitive, but content creation is also competitive. And there are places and instances in which collaborating makes a lot more sense. But when you're trying to really reach a goal, then you know what? You try to put out the best product out there.
And Jeanette, can you pushing a little bit further into collaboration? I know from being somewhat in the content creation world that people ask a lot of favors. And Avi and Doug, I'm interested in your opinion as well. How do you figure out, Jeanette, when something is a collaboration and when it's a favor?
Oh, that's a tough one, right? Because when you're collaborating, you're working together towards a goal. Let's say that we want to do a show together. We want to do a podcast together. That way we're tapping into both our communities. So that way we can only strengthen ourselves and we can offer something better to our communities, right? Because coming together makes us stronger. But sometimes a favor is when it's very transactional and it's very one-sided. So when I really, okay, you're asking for help, maybe I'll do it because your goal, I think I can be aligned with, even though I know I'm not getting anything from it aside from helping you out and feeling good about helping you out. But many times I get asked for favors that are so one-sided that really don't make any sense for me. And I set boundaries. I used to be really bad at setting boundaries because I felt that I had to collaborate all the time. Now it's okay to say no.
I think one of the advantages, Avi, that you talked about is when you know that you have not just a client base, which is of course crucial, but also employees. One of the things that small business owners struggle with is it's really just up to me. It's my resources, my time, my company. Until I had people working for me, I didn't owe it to anybody else to be as lean and competitive as possible. And it's when you're either serving a mission that you really give credit to often, when you remind yourself, this is why we're doing this, or you have a lot of people whose livelihoods depend on you, then I think it becomes easier to say, listen, I don't want to, I don't want to crush these people like bugs, but if they're not going to do the work that earns them the opportunity, that's their problem. I am. And I do wonder if there's some value making it to having some number of employees whose paychecks you have to sign that makes that part easier to come to terms with.
It's a very sensitive point. For me, you touched on probably the highest value as a business owner that I had. So I know in a lot of the business schools, it's always the customer first. I never really subscribed to that. I had my employees first because if I took care of my employees, I knew they took care of my customers. It was that logic. Maybe it's flawed, but it worked for me. At Heyday, we topped out at about 1,500 employees, and that's a big responsibility for me, at least. I'm sure there's companies with many more, but I always looked at them as family members, and if I didn't have the business run correctly or competed as I needed to compete legitimately and with ethics, but still competition, I don't want to have a layoff. I don't want to send people home to their families that didn't do anything wrong, that worked for me as hard today as they did yesterday. They build the ground I walk on financially, right? Even though if they were on the production lines. So that's a very high responsibility, and it ties into competition and also collaboration. Look, if I can get a lot of business by outsourcing to a competitor without really hurting my own business, that's okay too. And we've done quite a bit of that as well. But at the end of the day, my employees and their families were valuable to me as much as my family. It was their 8 hours were as valuable as mine. It had nothing to do with dollars. It didn't matter if they made $8 an hour and I made $80 an hour, whatever the number is. It was really, they're not going to see their kid for 8 hours. I'm not going to see my kid for 8 hours. We can't get those 8 hours back. They're my priority. And that was the culture. And when you have that culture, you also have a culture of resilience because everybody is trying to win and move forward. It doesn't mean we compromise ethics. It doesn't mean we do things wrong against the competition. It just means we prioritize.
Doug, can you speak to that idea when you're in the social good space and at least everybody's supposed to be there for this really important social mission? Not to say that you don't have some people working in your organizations who are there because they don't care where they answer the phones, but they need a paycheck. And I'm a doctor at a federally qualified health center, and some of our MAs and a lot of our nurses and people who've had more training, they are highly mission aligned And some folks got hired to draw blood there, but they could have drawn blood at the for-profit lab down the street. It doesn't much matter to them. But for the folks, when you're trying to be very mission oriented, can you or do you consider the needs of your employees in terms of success, in terms of fundraising and bringing in the attention and the money as a high ethic, or is there too much pressure there?
I think you can focus on your team and you can focus on your core values and your ethics. I will tell you, when I was a young leader, I used to get incredibly frustrated when I didn't see the same level of passion from every single person in the organization. And it took me a while to realize that that's just not reality. I mean, again, whether you're a cancer survivor or have a family member or whatever, it's a different experience and your level of connection to the mission might be diverse. But I think one of the challenges that we face is in this nonprofit sector, at least, is that there's no financial market for maybe the fiercest level of competition. So as an example, there's no M&A market. And that's something I've always struggled with because there should be more M&A in the nonprofit space.
Yes.
There just should be, right? But there's no financial incentive to do so. So there's no buyout, there's no PE firms, there's no market for it. And I think that ultimately is a struggle for the sector because we have duplication.
And it doesn't reward excellence then.
Correct. And if you're actually rewarded for the opposite. You're rewarded. It's sort of like this scarcity mindset. It's like, who can do the most with the least? And it's like, that's not the way business is run. And so I think the sector in general would benefit from some more competition that would create better service and better outcomes for the people across any number of causes or issues.
All of the nonprofits that celebrate their 70 years of existence or their 100 years of existence and fundraise based on those anniversaries, it strikes me in a new way when you say this, that maybe that can't be the goal, that achieving your mission more in a more streamlined and competitive way is actually the goal to serve your mission better.
Well, exactly. And the way that organizations in our space are measured is a strictly financial measurement. You file a 990 tax return that says how much you raised and how much you gave away. And that doesn't tell us anything, right? I could tell you that we raised $100 million. That doesn't tell you how many clinical trials or how many patients or how many breakthroughs. Or I could say the food bank raised $10 million. Well, how many people did it feed? Or how efficient was it? Or and so because there aren't universal metrics, there is no NASDAQ. There is no sort of earnings per share. Like there's no real metric. It's caused, I think, maybe less competition in the truest sense and probably worse outcomes in the community.
And to our topic, less drive for collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, look, Jeanette made a comment earlier. I was almost laughing because when I was 19 years old, I was diagnosed with cancer. I started this nonprofit, tiny organization in my dorm room. I didn't know anything. I was totally naive. And I called the leader of a major cancer organization. And we had this great conversation. I will not name this organization. And I said, look, I'm planning this fundraiser. I literally knew nothing. I said, can you help put me in touch with somebody who's a cancer survivor who's visible that we could get as the keynote speaker? And this person said, I couldn't possibly do that. I've got my own events to plan. And I was 19. I was naive. I was like, what? I thought everybody would get along. Everybody would work together, and
we all just want to live.
Point, that was the reality. And looking back, I appreciate this person's candor and honesty. At the time, I was so mad. I was so angry. But I get it. I'm not saying I would have said it the same way or done it the same way, but I get it.
Okay, Jeanette, if you're going to flip from I'm always looking for ways to collaborate, collaboration is so much better than competition, to this mindset that seems more familiar to us in larger companies of maybe a collaboration is nice, but in general, we're here to compete and be the best we can be. How do you find the resilience to do that? And when you're speaking to clients and you have more of a mindset of, let me tell you why you should hire me and not someone else, do you get any pushback to that affect?
I don't ever get any pushback from my clients. or from the
Right.
brands that I'm working with. The pushback comes from the community of content creators that in the end are really competing with you. But nobody likes the word competition these days. They feel that it's very aggressive, especially when it comes from a woman, and especially when supposedly we're all helping each other grow. And yes, I am always helping people grow. I'm very generous with my time. I donate my time. I speak at conferences for free. I nurture relationships with people who are just starting out. I've never been one to turn away from that. But when you are seeking my contacts, or when you want me to do something that is really a favor that's only benefiting you, then you know what? Setting boundaries, not in the way that Doug was alluding to. I probably would have referred a 19-year-old who's as passionate as 19-year-old Doug to different ways in which he can gather those contexts, right?
Right.
And
Jeanette is unlikely
maybe
to
show
have.
them the way.
Hey,
Yes,
Doug,
but
oh, you have cancer, 19-year-old Doug? Ah, too bad. Suck it.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, figure it out. I had to figure it out. You just go figure it out. I would never do that because that's not who I am. But collaboration comes in different levels, right? And there, you always have to have the context around the interaction to see if it's just transactional, and it might benefit you down the road. There's nothing wrong with transactional relationships, but I do feel that once you have those goals aligned, whether it's meeting your employees' paychecks every month, whether it's being the best in your business, whatever it is, whatever your value proposition is, you have to be really smart with your time, with your resources, with your energy. And when it's not serving you, then you know what? It's a nice to have. It's not something that you have to do.
I think that's a great way to look at that. Doug, when you are, and I don't know if you still do in Orly because I know it's grown, but when you've counseled social entrepreneurs, when you've advised them, how do you teach them to think about collaboration and competition?
I actually think that Jeanette hit it right on the head, which is this idea of like, are you building a relationship or is it transactional? And I think oftentimes social entrepreneurs are scraping by. If it's a for-profit, they're trying to raise money for their startup. If it's a nonprofit, they're constantly sort of under-resourced, which sometimes unintentionally leads to more transactional behavior. They'll say, oh, I got to raise this money, or I got to meet this venture capitalist, or I got to do this by the end of the year. And what they're doing is they're shortchanging the long-term relationships that they could build if they felt like they had more time. And so we sort of focus a lot of time and attention on building relationships and sort of trying to get people to step back from the day-to-day pressure and stress that may cause them to act in ways that again, unintentionally hurt them in the long run. Because again, the world is small and getting smaller, and those relationships are more and more valuable every single day.
Avi, Bruce asked in the questions, and thank you to the folks who've been putting comments and questions in the chat. He says, he didn't state it as a question, but I will. Competition does not lend to creating standards and modeling behaviors. And you talked a lot about your employees and how much you focused on them and thought about them. And so I wondered, how did you look at encouraging competition among and collaboration between different people on your own teams? Because they are competing for promotions and opportunities. And we want to see them, I think, working the hardest they can to prove what their strengths are and their values are. And yet, need them to not, kick the person next to them back down the ladder. How did you think about that as a boss?
We had tremendous amount of programs that promoted internal competition with rewards. You got to have a reward attached to it. So our production lines were competing with each other for a financial benefit on a monthly basis. And then there was like a grand slam. So now the team on the same production line are all aligned, and it included metrics that are not just production. It had to do with attendance, behavior, attitude, things of that nature, the non-tangible measurements. The other thing we did in a more macro way, at least at my company, is that we had an education fund. Any employee that wanted to go back to school and wanted to improve themselves, we had no rules on what major they want to take. All they had to do is show us that they went to class. They had to bring a B or above because we didn't want to pay for mediocrity. and we pay them their school back to $1, no strings attached. If they left the company a day after they got their master's, they didn't have to pay anything back. So we gave people the opportunity to improve themselves, which in turn improved our organization and allowed them to compete. It goes down to human behavior and the individual. Some people are more driven, some people are more comfortable with their job, and I'm happy with my paycheck and I want to go home. A little bit of a step in there. I wanted to touch on something that I sold the company over 10 years ago, so maybe something changed in the environment, in the mood, in the country. I struggle a little bit with competition being a bad word. I think that when you think about entrepreneurs, whether it's nonprofit or for profit, pretty much any entrepreneur I know, emotionally and psychologically, is a competitive person. Otherwise, they won't lead in and go into the limelight under that helicopter hovering above them in the fire zone, right? So when you're trying to put it under the banner, everything is collaboration, it feels to me like you're suppressing something that is the most natural, innate emotion of an entrepreneur that wants to lead and win and succeed, whatever the example may be. So I struggle a little bit with competition becoming a bad word. There's nothing wrong with collaboration. It absolutely can live alongside competition, but I don't think it's something that I would, agree suppressing in entrepreneurs that I'm coaching.
That's an excellent way of thinking about that. One of the comments that we have, Peter Nathan, who has spent his career in biotech, and he pointed out that collaboration in biotech development and manufacturing is often with your competitors, like other companies, and with potential partners, because there's know-how or IP from that other party that's essential for getting the ball over the goal line. And that the key is to ensure that both are intact for what they contribute and the results. So saying, I contributed this, you contributed this, they're both valued and they're both rewarded. And it's an interesting way to think about that. Certainly, and I'm not going to ask Peter, but I know that sometimes shady things happen in business. But when in biotech, you are so obviously trying to save lives and make good money back for your shareholders, it's, I think, another field where they have to give a lot of thought constantly to both the competition and the collaboration, because it might be that you know how to keep that particle alive for the extra nanosecond it takes for that vaccine to work. I know what the ingredients of the vaccine need to be, and if we don't put this together, lots of people are going to die. It's high stakes, this conversation about competition and collaboration. I wanted to point out just a couple of neuroscience kind of points about this. One is, and Jeanette, you and I think, came to this thinking like, doesn't everybody see how much women get a lot of pressure not to be competitive? And there are some biochemical markers in the brain that make women's brains more adept at, in general, these are huge generalizations, at gathering, and men's at hunting. And the things that make women valuable to a community, and I'm talking, back millennia, is our ability to keep track of the people in our family group, watch out for predators, and gather a variety of fruits, vegetables, roots, grains for our family's subsistence. Yeah. And so that is, as when you picture trying to do all that, you can see why collaboration is something that makes our whole community safer when women elevate collaboration. And men as hunters, they do better when they elevate collaboration only in a small circumcised group, their hunting party, and real competition with both their prey and other people who are trying to get to that prey, or other animals who are trying to get to that prey. And so I do think that there may be some really fundamental basics of community living that make people disdain women who say, I'm going to strike out on my own, or my company is going to strike out on its own. And if you want to come along, or there's some value you can bring, or we can bring to you, we can talk about that. But our main goal is competition. But Avi, to your point, leaders and entrepreneurs especially are, and I'm going to use a 7th grade science term, philic, as opposed to phobic, right? If you're phobic, you're afraid of something. Philic, to risk. They're drawn to risk. It's why visionary leaders so often need to surround themselves, and now I'm not talking about gender at all, with people who are more risk phobic, who are going to be a little bit more questioning and careful and say, well, but wait a minute, maybe we should slow down and have some caution here. And what could happen if we do that? Whereas the leader's like, how many times have the people on this call experienced saying to your team, I have an idea. And instead of, really, I can't wait to hear it, you get, oh, great, you have another idea. And that balance is really valuable. It's a useful collaboration between you and your team when you have someone who's a go-getter. But that risk philic requires competition to feed it in a lot of very real ways. You need to say not just, what could I do really well, but who's doing this? And I think I can see a way to do it better. That drive, and Bruce in the comments talked a little bit about this, said, I see the value of competition also in creating a mean price within the marketplace. When I think about that metaphorically in terms of social good, or when I think about that in terms of working with brands and doing influencing, or even when you are talking about something as what I consider obviously corporate, as we are going to create ways to handle e-waste or printer cartridges, that when you're thinking about this benefits everyone, when I'm thinking about what's a better way to do this, what's a smarter way to do this, what's a higher quality way to do this, that if we don't do that, we end up with a completely different kind of society. You all talked about a couple of strategies that we know calm the amygdala, which is the part of our brain that says, risk, oh my gosh, what could go wrong? We could all die. And when we're thinking about looking for opportunities to compete successfully, that part of the brain kicks off more in women than in men. And so this may be, Jeanette, part of what you and I have experienced is that other women are like, I don't want you to compete because having to compete makes me feel at risk, makes me feel more threatened. And so I think that recognizing that can help us know how to bring ourselves along, how to find our own resilience. One of the most obvious and successful ways to calm the amygdala is by reminding our brains of our own agency. What do I have choice over, right? What, not necessarily control, but choice. Where do I have opportunities for choice? As soon as we ask that question, a part of our brain kicks in that calms the amygdala, just soothes it and settles it down. Where do I have choice in this situation? And none of you even needed to mention it because you're so good at looking for choice all the time. And it's so obvious to you, but it's a really important strategy that we all use. You gave us some excellent steps. You said, first of all, Avi pointed out, redefine who the competition is. What's competition in this setting? Avi, you said when you were working with this company, you thought to yourselves, our competition isn't people who do it poorly but quickly. Our competition is only the company that does it with incredible quality.
Yeah.
So all these people who do it poorly but quickly, maybe we could learn from them. Maybe we could, they could hire us, but whatever, they're not our competition. We know we can beat them out. When you redefine who your competition is, it changes your view of who you can collaborate with. When you are thinking about a partner's collaboration, I heard you guys give me this list, basically. Do they share your values? Do they share your mission, or are you at least aligned with their mission? Doug, you talked specifically about people with whom you obviously share a mission. And Jeanette said, when I'm looking at this, am I okay with your mission? Can I go along? Am I willing to be aligned with that mission? It doesn't have to be my mission. Jeanette and I do work that's similar, but we don't have the exact same mission for our businesses. Every time we've ever worked together, we found ourselves, it's pretty easy to align with each other, though, because our worldviews are pretty similar. What we're trying to do is pretty similar. What strengths does this potential collaborator have? Is there real quality there? And I think the flip side of that, what weaknesses do they have? And what's our ability to navigate change towards a positive goal? So before you decide competition or collaboration, or this new model, new to me model that we've been talking about, which is collaboration within competition. You said, Avi, collaboration living alongside competition, whatever that model is, what's the goal? And if it's a shared goal and shared values, it may absolutely be the right way to go. I really appreciate this perspective. I think it's incredibly valuable. It's not, however, easy. So I'd like to end by asking you each this question. And Doug, I'm going to start with you. When you find yourself, and maybe it's 19-year-old Doug or something that just happened yesterday, when you find yourself in the face of that competition, maybe even competition that you didn't expect or you didn't think needed to be competition, how do you build your own resilience to be able to navigate that?
It's a great question. I mean, personally, and it goes to Avi's point earlier, I'm so driven and so competitive individually that I don't ever feel a struggle to find that resilience. I think it's just sort of part of who I am and frankly part of my cancer journey. Like having gone through that, I see things in a different context. And so when others might see a struggle, I see opportunity. But I would just sort of tie to that to say, and I heard this in an event we hosted many years ago, and I never forgot it, which was the CEO at the time of Nike, Mark Parker, was asked about Under Armour. And his answer was, the difference between Nike and our potential is far greater than the difference between Nike and any of our competitors. And what he meant was, he's like, we're going from 8 billion to 30 billion. If they go from 1 billion to 2, great. But he was seeing the competition from within. It was like Nike is competing with themselves to reach their potential. And I sort of try to do that with the organizations I'm a part of. It's like, where's our potential? And if we get there, the competition will go by the wayside.
That is a fantastic quote. That is going to live in my brain for quite some time. Avi, when you are advising people who are running a company differently than you would, or making decisions that you think are not going to best serve them, or when you see them facing a lot of competition, when you just feel like, boy, nobody's seeing the world right, what do you do to dig down to when it wouldn't be your inclination? How do you find that resilience?
If I'm advising people, at the end of the day, my approach is that I can't really take it personally. It's their business, it's their life. My job is to really create shareholder value, and I really don't get into what's going on behind the scenes with them or emotionally. It's basically, here's the way I think this movie is going to play out, and I'm not school educated. I just seen the movie myself and did the surgery on my own knee, over the years. I just made so many mistakes that I can just tell you that I can see how this is going to end. I typically, if I want to influence a leader, I find that, yeah, we can talk about KPIs and numbers and analysis until we're blue in the face, but I find that a more emotional, psychological sharing approach tends to gets another leader to see the picture. I also come in with a lot of questions. I really don't tell them what to do. I just ask them a lot of questions so they can actually answer it themselves and get their brain going, thinking about what it is. It's a little bit like YPO Forum. I share the experiences, I share the mistakes, I ask them a lot of questions, and then allow them to deduct on their own how they want to go about it. People tend to find the right way 9 out of 10 times, or what will work for them, by listening to somebody sharing the story versus somebody telling them what to do and how to do it. So that's kind of like the way I generally, your question is very large. We could spend an hour on that.
For sure.
But generally speaking, I apply more to the emotional and psychological approach versus numbers and spreadsheets. Those are easy to manage.
And I want to point out the strategy that you also mentioned, which is to get curious, to ask more questions.
Always, because it triggers thought process and solutions in their mind, not in my mind. I don't know their business. I don't know their business better than they do. I can just share and observe and put a highlighter on it, and they got to figure it out.
Jeanette, you are in an industry that is constantly asking you to collaborate and requiring you to compete, and is really sensitive to a lot of trends and influences in the larger society. How do you find the resilience in the face of lots of competition and obstacles to keep going?
Well, first of all, I always have my why in front of me. Why am I doing this, right? And that way it helps me stay on track, whatever it is, whether it's a collaboration in which I see there's a win-win. There has to be a win-win, or else it's not a collaboration. And when I'm competing, I also need to know that just like I want to be the best one at something, or that I want to achieve a certain goal, I might not be the one to achieve it. And so the resilience really comes in when I have to realize that I have to learn from either that mistake or something that I did not achieve, and use that to build my strength and to try better or try a different approach next time. And that might mean collaborating more in one sense, if it makes sense to pool resources and maybe bring in somebody who could be seen as a competitor, but maybe it will make us stronger when we're doing a proposal, or figuring out, you know what, no collaborations in this sense. I really have to just figure out a way to compete better.
Peter reminds us that focusing on the why leads to being creative about the how, and I appreciate that. And I really appreciate that you all three helped me think differently about using collaboration strategically to become more competitive towards the mission of my business. I hope that everybody here got something that they can use for that same goal. Thank you all for your time and your attention. And we'll see you next month at the end of June on the 24th. And our topic will be finding the resilience to further your own career.